Very good. So shalom, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Today is the Feast of Dedication, where we'll be going in great length in the study of Hanukkah. But before we get started, we're going to talk just briefly on a couple of announcements. Real fast, we have just around the corner here, a few classes starting up with JSI. We just wanted to send out a quick reminder to you for those who haven't signed up yet that are interested. There is still time to register, but time is running short. So if you are interested in joining, please make sure you reach out to jsiyeshiva@gmail.com and we will get you registered. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the transition to the Ba-Peretz domain. I thought at one point our email issues were ironed out. A lot of you were not getting communications. I apologize for that because, again, we found out that we were sending to the wrong email distribution list. It was going to the test. This should be corrected, but if you are not getting emails as of today, please let me know later on. We'll look into this further, but we do believe we've gotten this corrected. So again, contact information as shown below. You're familiar with it by now. Last I wanted to cover was just the recommended movie for this week. We did find a free way in which to reach it, and we would love for you to watch a classic black and white movie called The Devil and Daniel Webster. It is fiction. It's got a little bit of suspense and a lot of drama. It's a really good story. It's a very good cinematic. So if you get a chance, we highly recommend you watch it. It will enlighten you and kind of give you a reminder. In the early days of the Americas, we honored Shabbat. And this is kind of a reminder of that and some of the Puritan ways that are kind of lost now. But in any event, I didn't want to digress on that. Highly recommend you watch the movie. And if you have, you want to share your thoughts with it, please let us know. So let's go ahead and get started. So the overview in the Feast of Dedication, and dedication meaning Hanukkah, is an 8-day festival of Hanukkah, which begins each year on the 25th day of the lunar month of Kislev. This usually corresponds to late November or December on the Gregorian calendar. Hanukkah, which means dedication, the Feast of Hanukkah is the Feast of Dedication. So it's thoroughly a Jewish festival that commemorates an important Jewish victory over tyranny. With exception for its mention in the book of John, it is not a biblical festival. Unlike the festivals Pesach, Shavuot, or Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and Sukkot, Hanukkah is not an appointed time, Moed, for the Torah, from the Torah, excuse me. Instead, the celebration of Hanukkah began after the last book of the Hebrew Scriptures had been composed. By the time of the apostles, however, it had become a long-established tradition. The events that Hanukkah commemorates occurred some 160 years before the birth of Yeshua. So the events behind the festival of Hanukkah are found in the apocryphal books of First Maccabees. Therein, the story is told of how Judah Maccabee and his heroic band of freedom fighters overthrew the tyrannical Seleucid forces that had subdued Judea and defiled the Jerusalem temple. After recapturing Jerusalem, Judah Maccabee and his followers purified and rededicated the temple. The altar that had been defiled with pagan sacrifices was dismantled and a new one was built. The menorah, the altar for incense, the table of the bread of the presence, and the curtain before the Holy of Holies were all replaced. When their work was complete, they established the 25th day of Kislev as the date for the rededication of the temple, because that date was the anniversary of the day in which the temple had been defiled 3 years prior. So to celebrate the restoration of Yahweh's holy temple, all Jerusalem rejoiced for 8 days. Judah Maccabee declared that the future generation should rejoice annually during these 8 days to remember the miracles of the temple dedication. Again, Hanukkah means dedication. So the events behind Hanukkah happened during the turbulent years of the disintegration of Alexander the Great's Grecian Empire and the rise of the iron-clawed Roman Empire. In those days, the land of Israel found itself buffeted between world powers that sought to use her as a natural land bridge between Africa and Europe and Asia. The people of Israel were the victims of a great political upheavals. War was never far from their land. At the same time, another war was being waged among the people of Israel. Alexander's conquest had introduced the world to Greek language, thought, custom, and philosophy. Greek education had become a universal standard. Western art, science, athletics, literature, and religion had infiltrated the East, and the land of Israel was no exception. Many Jews fell under the sway of Hellenism and embraced the Greek worldview with open arms. So in summary, instead of Torah, they pushed philosophy. Instead of mitzvot, virtues and aesthetics. Instead of revelation, reason. Instead of the Lord, the gods of Olympus. So around 200 BCE, the land of Israel was conquered by the Seleucid dynasty as part of their ongoing campaign against the Egyptian-based Ptolemies. In the year 175 BCE, before Common Era, Antiochus, fourth, inherited the Seleucid throne and declared himself Epiphanes. He asserted that he was divine. Behind his back, however, people called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means Antiochus the madman. Antiochus ordered all his subjects to erect and worship statues of himself in their temples. In addition, he sought to unify his territorial holdings by imposing strict Hellenism. The Greek language became mandatory. Greek culture and religion were also required. Hellenist Jews brought a gymnasium to Jerusalem, and a godless Hellenist Jew named Jason was even appointed as high priest. In 169 BCE, Antiochus' army suffered a humiliating defeat in their Egyptian campaign when a Roman intervention, ships from Kittim, put a halt to their advance. Shamed and angry, Antiochus turned his army back north to return through the land of Israel. When the news reached him of the civil unrest in Jerusalem, however, he sacked the city indiscriminately and slaughtered thousands of citizens. During the siege, he entered the Holy Temple and stole the gold and silver, including the incense altar, the table, and the menorah. Not long after that, Antiochus issued orders that all nations under his power were to immediately relinquish their various religions and cultures and embrace Greek culture and faith. This was especially problematic for the Torah-based culture and religion of Judea. In fact, the edicts were specifically aimed at the Jews. The daily sacrifices were discontinued. The Jerusalem temple was converted into a temple to Zeus. On the 15th day of Kislev, an image of Zeus was erected in the temple, the abomination of desolation. 10 days later, they began to sacrifice swine to the idol upon the altar of the Lord. Antiochus also issued orders forbidding circumcision, Sabbath observance, kosher diets, and the study of Torah. The text of the Maccabees records that those who attempted to live out the Torah paid with their lives. Many Jews chose to comply with the new laws. They forsook Torah to save their lives. Others stood fast to the covenant and paid with their convictions dearly. There were several famous stories in Jewish lore about brave men and women who resisted tyranny during the Hanukkah persecutions. There was the story of Eliezer, who chose to die rather than eat pork, or even pretend to eat pork, as noted within 2 Maccabees 6:18 through 31. There is the story of Hannah and her 7 sons, each of whom was martyred before her eyes for their refusal to forsake the commandments of Torah, 2 Maccabees 7. There is a story of a brave Judith who pretended to seduce an enemy general, and then slew him to liberate her entire town. But the best known of all these stories is the story of Mattathiyahu, the priest and his sons. Matthias in Greek, his sons were Kohanim, priests, who abandoned Jerusalem when the temple was defiled. They could not, however, escape the arm of Antiochus. The king's officers eventually came to Mattiyahu's hometown in Modin to force them to sacrifice to an idol. In the city of Modin, Mattiyahu and his sons refused to comply. Instead, they revolted and took up arms against the king's officers and slew them. They knew this act of insurrection would bring wrath down upon them. So old Mattiyahu called out to all the people of Modin, shouting, "Let everyone who is zealous for the Torah and who stands by the covenant follow after me." First Maccabees 2:27. Then he and his sons fled into the mountains. Hidden away in the mountains, Mattiyahu and his sons were not long alone. Very quickly, all those who were zealous for the Torah gathered around them. They soon formed a small army. Mattiyahu himself was very old, and he died in the hills. His oldest son, Judah, took charge of the small rebel group, engaging in guerrilla warfare against the Syrian occupation force. Yehuda and his freedom fighters came to be called Maccabees, which means hammers. Judah would forever after be known as Yehuda the Maccabee, Judah the hammer. Early success attracted attention, and the little army was harassed constantly. Soon enough, the Seleucids sent thousands of mercenary soldiers to root out the rebels in the hills. They must have thought it would bring quick and easy end to the Hanukkah revolution, but a great miracle happened there. In a stunning victory, Lord overthrew the massive army before the small band of rebels. It was clearly a miracle from heaven. Yehuda and his brave Maccabees fought many battles for many years. They suffered defeats, but also achieved many miraculous victories. In battle after battle, the few overpowered the many, the weak overturned the strong. They pushed forward despite overwhelming odds. Miraculous intervention shifted the battles until at last they were able to take back Jerusalem. So upon entering Jerusalem, Yehuda and his brother priests were dismayed to see the temple desolate, the altar profaned, the gates burned, and the holy courtyard overgrown with weeds. They tore their garments and cried out to heaven and sounded the shofar. Before the last enemy had even been rooted out of the strongholds of Jerusalem, Yehuda set about restoring the temple. They tore down the defiled altar and built a new one. They made new implements and furnishings from what was available. One scrap of legend has it that they made a menorah of iron bars they found in the temple. Another famous legend has it that when they searched for the temple, they were only able to find one cruse of olive oil with the priestly stamp upon it. It was enough to fuel the lamps of the menorah for only one day. It would take 8 days before they could procure more olive oil fitting for use in the menorah. Uncertain of what to do, they decided to keep the mitzvah of lighting the menorah as best as they could. They lit it, fully expecting it to go out that day. Miraculously, the oil lasted for 8 days until the new oil could be obtained. Some say this is the reason for Hanukkah is celebrated for 8 days. It was on the 25th day of Kislev, exactly 3 years after the first swine had been sacrificed on the altar, that Yehuda and his men reinstated the daily burnt offerings to the Lord. They celebrated the rededication of the temple for 8 days. The days of dedication came to be remembered and celebrated as the festival of Hanukkah. In the 10th chapter of the book of John, we find that Yeshua at the temple in Jerusalem during the festival of Hanukkah. This requires some investigation. We would not expect to find him in Jerusalem at that time of year. Usually he's stomping around the Galilee with his disciples. Ordinarily, he is only in Jerusalem for the 3 pilgrimage festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. It is a surprise to see him in Jerusalem at Hanukkah. John tells us that it was Hanukkah, and Yeshua was walking through Solomon's colonnade, a portico, along with the eastern wall of the temple courts. It was on into this colonnade that the eastern gate of the temple opened. According to long-standing legend, Messiah would one day enter the temple in Jerusalem through the eastern gate. Zechariah 14:4 and Ezekiel 43 figure prominently in this imagery. Therein, the Messiah and the glory of the Lord, respectively, are portrayed as coming from the Mount of Olives. They come to restore Jerusalem and rededicate Hanukkah, the temple. It was probably through this eastern gate that Yeshua entered on the day of his triumphal entry. No doubt the messianic association with the eastern gate is why the early believers congregated in Solomon's colonnade. They wanted to be ready to greet him at his return. Thus, the portico was the birthplace of the assembly of Messiah. So it's somewhat surprising that Yeshua kept the festival of Hanukkah at all. Descendants of the house of David tend to be particularly ill-disposed toward the festival of Hanukkah. For example, consider Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, a distant cousin of Yeshua, who compiled the Mishnah in the 2nd century. He was no fan of the Maccabees or their Hanukkah revolution. In that whole, the vast body of Jewish law and tradition, he never mentions the celebration of the festival of Hanukkah. Why? Because much like Yeshua, he's a descendant of David. And if there's one thing the descendant of David could not stand, was those Hasmonean kings. The Hasmoneans were the priestly line of Maccabees, and therefore in the line of Levi. It was they and their descendants who proclaimed themselves kings of Israel, contrary to the covenant made with Judah and with David. When the Maccabees revolted and toppled the Seleucid sovereignty over Israel, they put themselves upon the throne of Jerusalem. In so doing, they removed themselves from the affection of the house of David. Their kingship was regarded as invalid, and it eventually became despicable, the despicable Herodian line. Thus, Yehuda, the prince, a son born of David's royal line, edits all reference to them out of the Mishnah. But here's Yeshua, a son of David, making a special pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the temple, to celebrate the festival of Hanukkah. Obviously, it was important to him. Therefore, it should be important to us as well. Can't stress that enough. Even though this festival is not biblical, the events that it celebrates certainly are. As far back as the book of Daniel, we discover the startling prophecies that lay the groundwork for the celebration of Hanukkah and help us understand why this festival was so important to Yeshua. So let's go into that. So, in the year 604 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar took Daniel into captivity into Babylon. His captivity began 18 years before Nebuchadnezzar returned to Jerusalem and leveled it, ending the Davidic monarchy, destroying the temple, and taking Judah into exile. In the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, still 17 years, the king had a dream. He saw an idolatrous image with a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, thighs of bronze, and a feet of clay and legs of iron. He told his astrologers and wise men, "Tell me my dream and give me the interpretation, or I will cut you to pieces." As noted within Daniel 2:5, none could except for one, a Judean named Daniel. The king said to Daniel, whose Babylonian name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation?" Daniel answered before the king, "Before the destruction of Judah, the king had a dream. He saw an idolatrous image with a head of gold, arms, chest of silver, thighs of bronze, and feet of clay and legs of iron. He told his astrologers, "When to tell me my dream and give me the interpretation, I'll cut you to pieces." None could except for one, a Judean named Daniel. The king said to Daniel, whose Babylonian name was Balthazar. I just realized we just repeated this. So I'm going to go forward here. So a reading of Daniel from the complete Jewish Bible. Hear the word of the Lord.
The king said to Daniel, who had been renamed Belshazzar, "Can you tell me what I dreamt and what it means?" Daniel answered the king, "No sage, exorcist, magician, or astrologer can tell his majesty the secret he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who unlocks mysteries, and he's revealed to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the Akarit Hayamim. Here are your dream and the visions you had in your head when you were in bed."
Thank you. Daniel described the great image of empires. The head of gold is Babylon. You, O Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 2:38. The arms and chest of silver represent the Medo-Persian Empire, as Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, another kingdom will rise inferior to yours. The thighs of bronze stand for the Greek Empire, established by Alexander the Great. Daniel says a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. The legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay are the fourth kingdom, the Roman Empire, as Daniel says it is. Strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. Daniel 2:40. The last kingdom, the one of iron and clay, is seen with 10 toes, representing, we are explicitly told in 10 kings. In chapter 7, Daniel sees a vision of this fourth and terrifying empire. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, the fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Daniel 7:7. The 10 horns of the iron beast correspond to the 10 toes of the image. They are kings, just as in the book of Revelation. Therefore, the idolatrous image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream represents the four human empires spanning a period from the end of Judean monarchy, 600 BCE before Common Era, up to the 10th emperor of Rome. Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC, is the head of gold. He is the Babylonian that begins the imagery. The 10 emperors of Rome are the 10 toes that complete the image. If we start with the first Roman emperor and count them off, we have an amazing result. It's no coincidence that Titus, the 10th, was the general who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in the year 70 CE. The image that began with the destroyer of Jerusalem spans nearly 700 years and ended with the destroyer of Jerusalem. That is the power of biblical prophecy. Amen. However, in the vision, the idolatrous image itself was not the victor, rather it was the victim. In his dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a rock strike the image and shatter it. Then the rock grew to fill the whole earth. The rock is generally understood to be the kingdom of heaven. It strikes the feet of Rome and shatters them. The declaration of the kingdom of heaven began with the message of Yochanan, the immerser, John the Baptist. Yochanan was prophesying during the days of the second emperor of Rome, Tiberius. Since then, the kingdom has continued to grow, and one day will fill the whole earth. It is the nature of prophecy to be vague, ambiguous, and slippery. The prophecies of Daniel are no exception. However, there are certain elements in Daniel that are astounding in their level of detail and accuracy, such as the four empires of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Another example is an amazing level of detail and prophetic clarity is in the description of the days of the Maccabees and the days of Hanukkah revolution. Daniel chapter 8 begins with the words, "In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king, a vision appeared to me." Belshazzar was the king who would see the handwriting on the wall that only Daniel could interpret. The little horn. He was the last king of Babylon before the empire was toppled by the Medes and the Persians. This His third year was in the fifth decade of the fifth century before Common Era. It was some 36 years or so after the destruction of Jerusalem, more than half a century after Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue. In that year, Daniel had a vision. Hear the word of the Lord.
In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me earlier. In the vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Shushan, which is the province of Elam. In the vision, I saw that I was beside the Ulai Canal. I lifted up my eyes and looked up. Behold, a ram with two horns was standing in front of the canal. The two horns were long, but one was longer than the other. But the longer one grew up last.
Man, thank you. Later in the chapter, the angel Gabriel explains the meaning. The ram represents the joint Medo-Persian Empire. Its capital, as we know from the story of Esther, is Susa, Shushan. One horn of the ram is longer than the other, suggesting that the Persian power was greater than the Medes. But Daniel continues to describe the vision. A goat with a single horn comes, charging from the west, and gores and tramples the Medo-Persian ram. We learn the interpretation from the historical record. The goat is the Greeks. The single horn is Alexander the Great. And in the year 336 BCE, Alexander the Great swept across the Mediterranean world and the Middle East. The Persian Empire toppled before him. In verse 8, we read about Alexander the Great. Read the word of the Lord.
The male goat became exceedingly great, but as soon as he became mighty, the large horn was broken. And in its place, four prominent horns grew up toward the four winds of heaven.
When Alexander was at the height of his power, he became deathly ill. Knowing that he was about to die and had no heir, he summoned his four greatest generals and divided his kingdom among them. Macedonia and Greece went to Antigonus. Thrace and Asia Minor went to Lysimachus. Babylonia and Syria went to Seleucus. Ptolemy inherited Egypt and the land of Israel. In the vision, the four generals are represented by the four prominent horns toward the four winds of heaven. After Alexander's kingdom was divided, Ptolemies and the Seleucids fell to war with each other. The land of Israel was between the two kingdoms and became strategically important in their battles. Generations later, a Seleucid king named Antiochus Epiphanes arose. Daniel foresaw him as a little horn arising out of one of the goat's four horns. 2,300 evenings and mornings. The little horn that took away the daily sacrifice and flung truth to the ground was Antiochus Epiphanes. There were to be 2,300 evenings and mornings until the sanctuary would be rededicated. Some interpreters who have not had proper understanding of the temple service assumed that this meant 2,300 days, which they further interpreted to mean 2,300 years. By this reckoning, they anticipated that the second coming of the Messiah would be the mid-19th century. He didn't come. The 2,300 evenings and mornings most probably refer to the 2,300 Korban Tamid sacrifices. In other words, the morning lamb and the evening lamb of the daily temple service. In that case, it is the morning and evening sacrifices being counted, not the days. Thus, it would have actually equaled up 1,150 days or 3 years and 2 months. Can these numbers give us an exact date of the fulfillment of the prophecy? Not for certain, of course, but because we do not have an exact date for when Antiochus actually stopped the daily sacrifices. However, we are provided with the date that he set up his idol, the abomination of desolation in God's temple. According to the Maccabees, it was set up on the 15th day of the month of Kislev. And the first hog was sacrificed to it on the 25th day of the same month in the year 168 BCE. 3 years later, on the 25th day of Kislev, in the year 165 BCE, the Maccabees cleansed and rededicated the temple. So according to the Maccabees, it was set up on the 15th day of the month of the Kislev, and the first hog was sacrificed on the 25th day in the same month in the year BCE. 3 years later, the 25th day of Kislev, in the 165 BCE, the Maccabees cleansed and rededicated the temple. This is nothing short of amazing. The Maccabees cleansed and rededicated the temple exactly 1,105 days after the idol was erected. We don't know for certain, but there is nothing to suggest that it was not exactly 1,150 days after the daily sacrifices ceased. 2,300 would then be the number of daily sacrifices that had been omitted during the period of the temple's desecration. In the book of Daniel, the angel Gabriel further describes the little horn as a stern-faced king. In chapter 11, he speaks of the long years of warfare between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. He describes in remarkable detail the rise of the various kings, the story of Cleopatra the first, and the machination of one he calls a despicable person, Antiochus Epiphanes. The following passage is a prophetic description of the days of Antiochus. Hear the word of the Lord.
Armed forces will come at his order and profane the sanctuary and fortress. They will abolish the daily burnt offering and set up the abomination that causes desolation. Those who act wickedly against the covenant, he will corrupt with his blandishments. But the people who know their God will stand firm and prevail. Those among the people who have discernment will cause the rest of the people to understand what is happening. Nevertheless, for a while they will fall victim to sword, fire, exile, and pillage. When they stumble, they will receive a little help, although many who join them will be insincere. Even some of those with discernment will stumble, so that some of them will be refined, purified, and cleansed, for an end yet to come at the designated time.
Amen. Thank you. So we discover a little of that prophetic ambiguity, as you notice. The events of Hanukkah revolution are explicitly described in these prophecies. The amazing level of detail was probably meant to comfort the people who would live through those dark days. This prophecy is not primarily intended for our benefit, but for the benefit of those who experienced the travails of persecution in that time. It was meant that they could see and understand. As Yehuda Maccabee read the book of Daniel, he must have asked, could this wicked Antiochus be the little horn? Could we be living out these days? Certainly. So Yeshua spoke of a second abomination that causes desolation. He told his disciples, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel, the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Matthew 24:15. Notice that Yeshua spoke about these things from Daniel as if they had not happened yet, but in fact they had and had not. Though these prophecies had all certainly been fulfilled in the days of the Maccabees, there was yet another vision in the book of Daniel that saw another little horn. This one is found in Daniel chapter 7. Remember that Antiochus, the little horn of Daniel in chapters 8 and 11, arose from the four horns of Greece. He was part of the Grecian Empire. In chapter 7 of Daniel, a different little horn arises. A little horn of chapter 7 arises from among the 10 horns of the terrifying beast of Rome. He is an 11th horn, and he follows the pattern of Antiochus. He's often identified with the Antichrist and the beast, regarding this beast as the 11th horn. And the angel Gabriel says, he will speak against the Most High and oppresses his righteous ones and try to change the set times and the laws. The righteous will be handed over to him for a time, times and a half a time. Daniel 7:25. A new little horn The new abomination sets about to change the appointed times, the biblical festivals, and the laws, the commandments of Torah. For believers, the significance is profound. When we celebrate Hanukkah, we're not just celebrating a victory that happened in the past, but one happens in the future, and one that is also happening right now. The story of Hanukkah is the story of light growing in the darkness. Wherever there are people of Torah, there is also darkness trying to snuff them out. History proves it over and over. But the miracle of Hanukkah is that the light is not diminished. Instead, the light grows. The story of Hanukkah is the story of a war between two worldviews, that of Hellenism and that of Torah. Hellenism is the language of humanism, philosophical theology, and relativism. Torah is the language of theism, mitzvah, deeds, and revelation. There is a battle going on today as far as the body of Messiah goes. The Hanukkah revolution has just begun. The return to Torah is not a fad. It is not an American or Israeli phenomenon. It is international. It is spreading everywhere to every people. And it is unstoppable because it's biblical. It is a sweeping Hanukkah rededication of the body of Messiah. And that is what we need. Individually and corporately, we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Like the holy temple of Jerusalem in the days of the Maccabees, we have been defiled as well. Even in the days of Paul, the mystery of Torahlessness was at work among the believers. Paul himself said so. He referred to the Antichrist as the man of Torahlessness. If the man of no Torah was at work among the believers, even in the first century, how much more so now? So consider the statutes of Antiochus decreed for Israel. Look at his laws. You shall profane the Sabbath. You shall profane the festivals and holy days. You shall set up idols. You shall eat unclean animals. You shall not circumcise your sons. You shall forget the Torah. For many centuries, Christianity has been following these laws of Antiochus, the laws of the abomination of desolation, instead of Torah, of God, by requiring Jewish believers to forsake Torah when they become believers. Only in recent years have Torah-oriented communities of believers been allowed to exist. 250 to 300 years ago in Europe, a community of Torah-keeping believers would not have survived long enough of pressure from the church, nor would it have fared well in America 200 years ago either. That is for certain. Hanukkah revolution has only just begun. As one studies the history of religion and the world, a disturbing pattern emerges. In every generation, there's a systematic assault on the Torah and on those people who choose to live by it. Thus, it says, Passover Haggadah, in every generation they rise up against us to destroy us. It is true, and never has it been more true than in our own generation, which have seen the events of the Holocaust and even recent events, with regard to what's going on in Israel. Our days are certainly no exception to the rule. Hear the words of the Master. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel, the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, and let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. As noted within Matthew 24:15. Yeshua's words allude to the Maccabee revolution of Mattatyahu, the father of Judah the Maccabee, said, Whosoever is zealous for the Torah and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. So too, saints in the book of Revelation are described as those who obey God's commandments and hold to the covenant of Yeshua. Perhaps the writer of Revelation is also alluding to this passage of the Maccabees. Therefore, when we sanctify the Sabbath day, We are standing against the abomination of desolation. We are in defiance of the abomination. When we choose to eat biblically, we are defining the edicts. We are defying the edicts of the desolation. When we choose to learn and live the word, God's Torah, we are part of that revolution. Hallelujah. So in closing, now that we have reviewed the significance of the Hanukkah story, we are better prepared to understand why Yeshua walked in Solomon's colonnade during the feast of Hanukkah and why the celebration of Hanukkah matters to us. Yeshua was anticipating the rededication of the temple. He was anticipating the living temple of believers that would one day congregate there. In addition, Yeshua foresaw that many of his followers would turn from the Torah. He knew full well that his ecclesia would one day be in need of Hanukkah. So in summary, Hanukkah is a festival commemorating the fight against Hellenization and assimilation. Hanukkah is a festival reminding us to purify our own bodies, temples of the Holy Spirit, and rededicate ourselves to God. We present our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing unto God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, as noted within Romans 12, verses 1 through 2. Hanukkah reminds us that we are locked in a struggle with the powers of darkness that seek to snuff out the light of Torah. Yet each night, the festival, our light grows brighter and brighter. That concludes our lesson for today. Thank you for your time.